Imagine spending 20 years, thousands of workers, and almost your entire kingdom's wealth, not on a palace to live in, but on a tomb to die in. That's exactly what ancient Egyptian pharaohs did, over and over again, for nearly 3,000 years. The Great Pyramid of Giza wasn't a home. It wasn't a monument to show off wealth to the living. It was a machine built with one single purpose: to launch a king into eternity. So here's the real question. Egypt's most powerful rulers had unlimited resources, unlimited labor, and unlimited power. They could have built the most magnificent palaces the world had ever seen. Instead, they poured everything into tombs. Why? The answer takes us deep into one of the most fascinating belief systems in human history, a civilization that was less concerned with how you lived and far more obsessed with what happened after you died. To understand this, we need to travel back over 4,500 years to ancient Egypt around 2600 BCE, during what historians call the Old Kingdom. Egypt at this time was ruled by pharaohs, but a pharaoh wasn't just a king. He wasn't even just a political or military leader. Egyptians believed their pharaoh was a living god on earth, a direct link between the mortal world and the divine realm. When a pharaoh spoke, it was believed the gods themselves were speaking through him. Now, compare this to other ancient civilizations. Kings in Mesopotamia, or later emperors in Rome, invested heavily in grand palaces, massive structures meant to display wealth, host courts, and impress both citizens and rival nations during their lifetime. But Egyptian pharaohs had a completely different set of priorities. Their focus wasn't on impressing the living. It was on preparing meticulously for what came after death. Because in Egyptian belief, that's where the real, permanent existence began. The Afterlife Obsession. Egyptians believed that death was not an ending. It was a transition, a doorway into an eternal afterlife that could last forever if you prepared correctly. But here's the catch. This afterlife wasn't automatically guaranteed. It had to be earned, protected, and carefully constructed, almost like assembling a survival kit for eternity. Egyptians believed a person was made up of multiple spiritual components. There was the Ka, a person's life force or vital energy, which needed to remain connected to the physical body after death. There was also the Ba, representing personality, mobility, and the ability to travel between the world of the living and the dead. For a pharaoh's Ka and Ba to survive and thrive in the afterlife, two things were absolutely essential. First, his physical body had to be preserved forever, which is exactly why mummification became such an elaborate, sacred process. And second, his soul needed a permanent, indestructible home to return to again and again for all eternity. Now think about a palace for a moment. Palaces in ancient Egypt were built from mud brick, practical but temporary. They were designed for daily life, administration, court gatherings, family living. Over decades, they would crack, crumble, and eventually be swallowed by the desert. A tomb, specifically a pyramid built from solid, massive stone, could last forever. And forever was precisely what a pharaoh needed his eternal home to do. Why a pyramid shape specifically? But this raises another question. Why did tombs evolve into this very specific pyramid shape, instead of just being large stone boxes or underground chambers? The shape itself carried deep, layered religious meaning. Egyptians worshipped Ra, the sun god, as one of their most powerful deities, the source of all life, light, and creation. The pyramid's triangular shape was believed to represent the rays of the sun descending directly from the sky down to earth, forming a physical, solid connection between the divine and the mortal world. Even more symbolically, the pointed tip of the pyramid, called the pyramidion, represented something called the Binbin, the primordial mound of creation. According to Egyptian mythology, before anything existed, there was only endless chaos and dark water. Then, a single mound of earth rose up from that chaos, and from it, all of creation began. By building a pyramid, Egyptians were essentially recreating that first sacred moment of creation, turning the pharaoh's tomb into a stone staircase, allowing his soul to climb upward, escape the boundaries of earth, and join Ra in the heavens, sailing across the sky in the sun god's eternal solar boat for the rest of time. The pyramid as a survival machine. Inside these massive stone structures, pharaohs weren't simply buried and forgotten. They were equipped, stocked, and prepared, almost like astronauts being sent on the ultimate one-way journey. Burial chambers were filled with extraordinary treasures: gold, jewelry, fine furniture, weapons, and enormous quantities of food and wine, meant to sustain the pharaoh in the next life. There were also small statues called shaptis, which Egyptians believed would magically come to life in the afterlife and perform labor on the pharaoh's behalf, so he would never have to work. The walls themselves were often covered in hieroglyphics and sacred spells taken from what we now call the Book of the Dead, essentially a spiritual instruction manual, guiding and protecting the soul as it navigated the dangerous underworld, faced judgment before the gods, and hopefully reached paradise. And here's the important part. Unlike a palace, this home wasn't built to be visited regularly. It wasn't meant for daily life at all. It was meant to be sealed completely, undisturbed for eternity, safeguarding the pharaoh's body and soul on his journey to true immortality. Why not a palace instead? So why didn't pharaohs simply build grand, eternal palaces instead of tombs? The answer really comes down to purpose. A palace served the living pharaoh's earthly rule, his administration, his court, his temporary time on the throne. But a pyramid served the eternal pharaoh, his infinite existence after death, which Egyptians believed mattered infinitely more than his brief mortal life. In fact, historical evidence shows that many pharaohs actually lived in relatively modest mud brick palaces throughout their reign, choosing instead to reserve their empire's greatest architects, resources, and labor force for constructing their tombs. To them, life on earth was temporary and fleeting, but the afterlife was forever, and they invested accordingly, pouring almost everything into what came next. The human cost, an engineering marvel. Building these pyramids was an almost unimaginable undertaking. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE, used over 2.3 million limestone blocks, with some individual stones weighing as much as 80 tons. It's estimated that somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 workers labored for roughly 20 years to complete this single structure. And contrary to the popular myth of enslaved laborers, archaeological evidence now suggests these were largely skilled workers, organized, fed, housed in nearby worker villages, and even provided with medical care when injured. This wasn't just an act of blind religious devotion. It stands as one of the greatest engineering achievements in human history, accomplished entirely without modern machinery, using nothing but ramps, levers, ropes, and extraordinary human ingenuity and coordination. Legacy and conclusion. Today, over 4,500 years later, the pyramids of Giza still stand, largely intact, while countless grand palaces from that same era have long since crumbled to dust and disappeared beneath the sand. In a strange twist of fate, the pharaohs actually got exactly what they had hoped for: immortality. Not through living in luxury during their lifetime, but through building something designed to outlast time itself. The pyramids remind us of a civilization that measured true greatness not by how well you lived, but by how thoroughly you prepared for what came after. It's a perspective completely different from our modern world, yet somehow it worked. Their monuments to death have outlived nearly every monument built to celebrate life. So the next time you see an image of the pyramids, remember, they're not just ancient monuments or tourist attractions. They're a 4,500-year-old attempt to defeat death itself, built by a civilization that believed forever was worth everything. If you found this fascinating, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into ancient history's greatest mysteries and unanswered questions.